Welcome, everyone. It's Tuesday, November 23rd, and we are going to discuss Broadway Danny Rose. And I can't wait to hear the discussion today.
Well, it's good to see you guys and welcome. I hope you got a chance to watch the movie or watch it again. Perhaps some of you saw it when it came out in 1984. It's hard to believe sometimes when I look at the dates on these movies and see how long they've been around, actually. So it's a kind of the heyday of Woody Allen. I mean, I think in terms, he had made very funny comedies early in his career, but wasn't taken particularly seriously as a director probably until Annie Hall in 1977, and then made a series of movies that are considered probably to be the classics of his career. And this is one of them. So a little, certainly lesser known than Annie Hall, less successful than Annie Hall. I think it's actually one of his most sympathetic portrayals of a Jewish character. So, often the Jewishness in the other movies is played for laughs. So I was talking to somebody yesterday about the scene in, I think, Hannah and His Sisters, where he's deciding to convert to Christianity. So he goes out and buys white bread and mayonnaise, and so that's kind of the way Judaism is usually treated. I mean, there's a scene in one of his earliest movies, I think it's Take the Money and Run, where he plays a character who spends some time in prison, and he volunteers for a medical experiment, which has no side effects except it temporarily turns him into an Orthodox rabbi. So there are these things like that are not quite as affectionate, I'd say. And to my recollection, this is the only character that I can recall him playing where he actually uses Yiddish every now and then. I mean, I think just because he feels that it fits the character, and so, but it's very rare to see that. So so it's interesting. Unfortunately, I guess we can't talk about a Woody Allen movie without talking about Woody Allen and whether or not he should be canceled, I suppose, at this point in time. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on that, but it's been a difficult question in the arts for centuries, right? I mean, do we stop looking at paintings by Picasso because of Picasso's peculiarities, right? Do we, all sorts of artists over the centuries have engaged in behaviors that are unacceptable. Now, whether or not he has, I mean, that's a legal question that the courts have essentially ruled in his favor over the years. But there's still a lot of evidence and a lot of unseemly allegations. So I'm not sure, and he's now in his 80s. He used to make a movie every single year. It was financed essentially by the same company, United Artists, for years and years and years. He's slowed down either because of those allegations or because he's in his 80s. I can't really say the answer, but I think his most recent movie didn't even get released in the United States. Actually, I happened to see it on an airplane flying somewhere, overseas. I don't remember what trip that was on. Might have been on my way to Egypt. I think I saw the most recent Woody Allen movie. But so I guess I'd put the work in the same category that I'd put of some of those other artists, right? I was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City last week and saw several Picassos, right? And if we stop looking at these things, it probably means people like Charlie Chaplin in the movies and lots of others. So it's a difficult question. People can certainly make their own decisions, but I will say that watching this movie, certain lines make you queasy once you hear once you hear the allegations that have been made against him over the years. When he sits at a dinner table and asks a 12-year-old if she's married, that line hits in a different way than it would hit, when it came out, right? And so there are those things that certainly are make for us disturbing moments. That said, I really wanted, it's impossible to talk about real Jewish classics without talking about some of these people. We've got a few others that we haven't touched or looked at over the years. I mean, at some point we might look at something directed by Roman Polanski, for example, who also has allegations against him. More than allegations, actually was found guilty of statutory rape in a court of law, but is an interesting character in many ways, but undeniably a good filmmaker. So that's what we're looking at today, is the craft and the art of it. And so I'm going to, as best I can, separate that from the personal life of him. So
Rabbi, you and I have talked about it, but Dax Shepard, who does a podcast, and he's an actor and he interviews a lot of people, and he was talking about, artists who, we have been Me Too'd, and whether it's Woody Allen or Harvey Weinstein, and he put it into a context that haunts me a little bit, saying that, let's say Albert Einstein, if he had done something, terrible, which he did not, would we throw out, the theory of relativity? No. And the point that Dax Shepard was making was that, the arts should mean more, that we should, value their contributions and be able to separate it.
Right. So it's sometimes, look, I'm, you could look at other, scientists and philosophers. One of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century was sympathetic to the Nazis, in Heidegger, right? So we do separate the work from the author, right? And so that's what we'll try to do with this today, which is not to say that we shouldn't hold people to a high standard when they're actually working and doing something, right? But now we're talking about looking back at something in retrospect. As I said, this movie is now, we're approaching 30 years old, right? So certainly no one had any idea.
It's 37 years old, because that's the year I got married.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's it goes back a ways, right? So in its time, when this movie came out, it was nominated for 2 Oscars, both for Woody Allen, one for Best Director and one for Best Screenplay. It did not win either of them, but so it's a worthy film. And so compared to our conversation, was that just last week when we were talking about Bye Bye Braverman, right? Bye Bye Braverman was not nominated for anything. Right? So it's an okay movie, but this is really much better, right, in terms of its craft. We've talked about New York as a character in movies, and Jewish movies in particular. Here we are again. I'd say not just New York, but the Carnegie Deli itself is a character in this movie, right? It shows up. It's in the framing device where these comedians playing themselves essentially are sitting around at a table swapping stories and start telling this story about Danny Rose, and that's told in flashback. Sadly, the Carnegie Deli, I think, went out of business during COVID. So not necessarily a casualty of COVID itself. I understand there was a messy divorce between the owners, and a couple of different things happened causing that. But it was a New York institution. It was around for many, many years. What does it say? Established 1937. So not as old as Katz's Deli on the Lower East Side, but a well-known, well-established deli that was around for a long time. On its menu, it has a sandwich named after Woody Allen. And so there are a few named sandwiches on the menu, and puns related to various celebrities. The Paul Simon sandwich is called 50 Ways to Love Your Liver. So if so there are things like that. So this makes this movie somewhat of a historical document already, that, because the deli isn't actually there any longer. So it's, I believe they still have an online presence. You may even still be able to order corned beef from Carnegie Deli, but the restaurant itself no longer exists. It was a Broadway hangout. It was indeed, tourists went there to see who might show up to eat a sandwich. And I saw the musician Lou Reed there when I lived in New York. I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, but there he was having a sandwich when, in 1985 or something. So 86 maybe. Anyhow, so let's look at the movie a little bit. There are a number of people playing themselves. Yeah. And he was Jewish, by the way, Lou Reed. So he's in a book that Vanessa gave me once called Jews Who Rock. So the movie has this framing device of these older comedians sitting around talking, telling stories of the road, things like that, which seems very naturalistic and very real. And the kind of place where they might meet and sit and chat and talk about the woes of being on the road and how things are not like they used to be. And some of their faces may be familiar to you, some less so. Some of them are Jewish, not all of them, but they're some interesting folks, and I'll just mention some of the guys who are sitting there. I think there are, when all said and done, I think I counted that there were 7 of them sitting at the table. I mean, it starts out with a couple and gradually people come and join them. I do think, and it's not the only place where Woody Allen does this in his movies, they have kind of in classical theater, there was the Greek chorus, the chorus that would come on stage and reflect on the action of the play. And I think in a sense that these folks function as the Greek chorus in this Woody Allen movie. You can tell me who you think is the best known of them. I'm the one who really is telling the story is Sandy Barron, whose real name was Sanford Beresofsky. He was born in Brooklyn in 1936. He died in 2001. Well-known stand-up comedian. He played a lot of gigs in the Catskills. Actually became pretty well known on a TV show in the 1960s called That Was the Week That Was, where he did political comic material, really. So something like in the vein of Mort Sahl. That show also had, if you remember, the musical comedian Tom Lehrer wrote songs for That Was the Week That Was. It was hosted by David Frost. Tom Lehrer, by the way, was also Jewish. Besides being a musician and songwriter, was a math professor at Harvard University. But so Sandy Barron did that. He continued to have roles on stage and television. Particularly, I seem to remember that he played a role in the TV series Seinfeld. I mean, it was a relatively small role, but he and the actor who played Jerry Seinfeld's father were bitter enemies in the place where they lived. So that's my recollection. There you go. That's great, Vanessa. You're doing great. There they are on Seinfeld. Sandy Barron on the right there. Right? Also at the table, there's a guy named Corbett Monica, not a Jewish comedian, but pretty well-known comedian in his own right. He was born in St. Louis in 1930. He might be best remembered as being on the old Joey Bishop TV show. When Joey Bishop had a talk show, Corbett Monica was his Ed McMahon, right? His sidekick who would come out and warm up the audience before the show began. As a result of his connection to Joey Bishop, who was kind of connected to the Rat Pack and, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and all those folks, Corbett Monica was often the opening act in Las Vegas for guys like Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., I think. Jackie Gale is sitting at the table as well. His real name is Jack Potofsky. He was born in Brooklyn in 1926. And again, a Borscht Belt comedian. He's the one who in the beginning of the movie is talking about how difficult it is to make a living. You have to have a good car these days, right? To drive to all the gigs because they're not right around the corner anymore. I see him there at one of the Dean Martin roasts. He was a regular on those roast shows. But he's been in a lot of movies as well. I mean, he's in the movie that Billy Crystal made that we would watch if I could find a version of it online, Mr. Saturday Night. He's in the Barry Levinson movie Tin Men about selling aluminum siding. He's in a movie with Warren Beatty called Bulworth. He actually got his start. This is just a peculiar little bit of trivia, but he got his start in show business as a drummer in jazz combos. And one of the acts that he played for essentially in burlesque was Sally Marr. And some of you may know, I see Neil shaking his head, he knows Sally Marr's son is a guy named Lenny Bruce. And Lenny Bruce apparently thought Jackie Gale was funny and encouraged him to do comedy. So the other guys who were sitting around, there's a guy named Morty Gunty, Austrian Jewish family, born and died in Brooklyn, born in 1929. He actually, before the Dick Van Dyke Show became the Dick Van Dyke Show, there was a pilot made when it was called Head of the Family. And it had all the characters. And you remember when we talked about Crossing Delancey, we mentioned that Sarah Miles actually played the part that Rose Marie played in the TV series in that pilot. Well, Morty Gunty was the original Buddy Sorrell before Maury Amsterdam in the pilot. So that pilot obviously didn't take off, and it was recast and reshot and recreated to make the Dick Van Dyke Show. So, and of course, Carl Reiner played the part that Dick Van Dyke plays in the Head of the Family pilot as well. So, so some interesting trivia there. The guy who does his imitation of James Mason is a great comic actor and impressionist. Will Jordan was his name, and best known for his impersonation of Ed Sullivan. In fact, most people who imitate Ed Sullivan actually imitate Will Jordan imitating Ed Sullivan, because it's really Will Jordan who came up with the thing about we have a really big shoe, right? And and there's a picture of him with Ed Sullivan. He actually made a living imitating Ed Sullivan in many ways. In the original Broadway cast of Bye Bye Birdie, he plays Ed Sullivan. And then in 2009, when it was revived, he played Ed Sullivan in the Broadway cast of Bye Bye Birdie. He also plays Ed Sullivan in at least a couple of other movies, including that Billy Crystal movie, Mr. Saturday Night. He plays Ed Sullivan. And in the movie that was made about the early days of the Beatles, I don't remember the name of the film at the moment, but where the Beatles are first coming to America and making their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, again, Will Jordan plays Ed Sullivan. So, but you could hear he does a pretty fair James Mason, and he had a number of other impressions that he did as well. The two other guys who show up at the table, one is a guy named Howard Storm. I think he may be the only one of these guys who's still alive. I didn't find a death date for him. He was born in 1931. He was a writer and director, not so much a stand-up comedian as someone who, wrote and things. He does appear in some of those early Woody Allen comedies, like Take the Money and Run and Bananas and stuff like that. He's got small parts in those movies. And the last one is a guy named Jack Rollins. And if you're a fan of Woody Allen's, you might recognize that name, because in just about every Woody Allen movie for at least 40 years, when the producer credit would come up at the beginning, Jack Rollins was always listed as a producer. His real name was Jacob Rabinowitz. He died in 2015. He co-produced Woody Allen movies since 1969. He was actually, and I would guess that he is something of a model for the character of Danny Rose. He was Woody Allen's manager. And when Woody Allen was getting his start in showbiz, he started as a writer, writing jokes, for a few dollars a pop. He was the youngest writer on Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows, which when we look at My Favorite Year in 2 weeks' time, we can think about that. He during his time as an agent, he represented Woody Allen, he represented Lenny Bruce, David Letterman, Robin Williams, Joan Rivers, Billy Crystal, Nichols and May, Martin Short, Robert Klein, and Paula Poundstone at various times in their careers, right? And like as it's depicted in the movie, those actors and comedians often left him at some time or another for another more high-powered agent, right? So he is sort of the story of Danny Rose. Woody Allen always felt a great debt to him. And so even though Jack Rollins didn't really have much day-to-day to do with the production of Woody Allen movies, his name and credit appears in every movie. And so he gets paid for every Woody Allen movie. And I presume now his estate still gets something from that. So Woody Allen left him, but always felt a debt of gratitude towards him. He is the guy who convinced Woody Allen that he should go up on the stage as a stand-up comedian. And if you've ever heard any of the recordings of Woody Allen as a stand-up, they still hold up now. He tells some amazingly funny stories. They're very, very clever, very worth listening to even now. Of course, a couple of other people show up in small parts in this movie. Milton Berle shows up, for a couple of scenes. His real name is Mendel Berlinger. And Milton Berle, I probably don't have to tell anybody on this call about Milton Berle, but he was essentially the first television star, taking stuff that he'd been doing for so many years in, vaudeville and the Catskills and all over, and bringing it to television, bringing sort of that Jewish Catskills humor into every household in America that had a television from 1948 to 1955. He was, of course, born Jewish, born in Harlem, actually, in 1908, and died in 2002. He did, as an older man, he started to dabble with Christian Science, of all things, which led Oscar Levant, the pianist, actor, and wit, to say about him that our loss is their loss. Milton Berle was a controversial figure in his own right in comedy. He was considered to be the original joke thief. taking taking a little bit from everybody else. It's something that a lot of really great comedians have been accused of over the years, even somebody like Robin Williams, because I think it's the plight of rabbis as well. I mean, we remember a lot of things, but not necessarily where we heard them. So, so when I write sermons these days, I sometimes have to Google my own sermons and see if I got that idea from somebody, So it's, nowadays you can do that. It was a lot harder to do back in the day. So I don't know that Milton Berle was an intentional joke thief, but comedians are like magpies, they hear a story. There's even a joke near the beginning of this movie where they're talking about that joke about Miami, right? About, the rooms are so expensive. I asked the clerk, can I get one cheaper? He says, yeah, but you have to make your own bed. That's $10 a night. I said, great, I'll take that. And he gave me a hammer and some nails and a board, right? So, and the guy says, oh yeah, that joke always kills when I tell it too, right? So they're all using the same material and sort of the joke. The major characters, of course, we have to mention Woody Allen himself, but let's Nick Apollo Forte, who plays the singer in the movie. This is really his only major film credit. I'm not sure where Woody Allen found him. Couldn't really find much information about him, but other than this movie, he got very few credits. He actually wrote a couple of the songs that appear in the soundtrack. Agita and My Bambina, it says in the credits, are written and performed by Nick Apollo Forte. So, so for a guy who doesn't do a lot of acting, I think he does a very good job. And there's something to be said for the way Woody Allen directs an actor in this. We, of course, should mention Mia Farrow, who made 13 movies with Woody Allen at a time when her career was not necessarily going great guns. She became kind of a muse for him. And as I say, he made a movie every year. So essentially for 13 years, she was in every one of them, starting with, I think, Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy, I think it's called, was the first one. I'm not sure what the last one was. But she, of course, became famous for the movie directed by Roman Polanski, who we mentioned earlier today, Rosemary's Baby, and then appeared in a few other starring roles. And then her career started to wane. And these movies with Woody Allen were a major turning point in her career. She does appear in a movie called A Wedding, which I like a lot, directed by Robert Altman, a director who won't appear in real Jewish classics because, to the best of my knowledge, there was never a Jewish. Well, the only Jewish, I was thinking about it actually and trying to think, are there any Jewish characters in any Robert Altman movie? And the only one I could think of was the Painless Pole, the Jewish dentist in the movie MASH, is the only character I can think of who's explicitly Jewish in a Robert Altman movie. There must be some in his movie about the Hollywood movie industry, The Player, but I couldn't think of one specifically. But anyway, A Wedding by Robert Altman was a Mia Farrow movie. She got her start on television as well. Some of you may remember far enough back that she was in Peyton Place on television for, I think, 3 seasons. One of the first primetime soap opera type shows, I think. She won a Golden Globe as the most promising newcomer during that time when she was on Peyton Place in 1965. She's actually been nominated for a Golden Globe 8 times, never been nominated for an Oscar. She was nominated for a Golden Globe for this. And in fact, this was considered to be a definite change of pace. People didn't even recognize that this was Mia Farrow in this movie. She was wearing dark glasses for most of it. And So she went almost unnoticed actually for a while. And then finally, Woody Allen, born Alan Konigsberg in Brooklyn in 1935. He was the youngest writer on Your Show of Shows for Sid Caesar. He got his first break writing a script for What's New, Pussycat, which originally I think was supposed to star Warren Beatty. Woody Allen was given a small part in it, and he gave himself a lot of jokes, and Warren Beatty got upset that he wasn't getting the good jokes, and he left the production. Peter Sellers then took over the role in What's New, Pussycat, but he insisted on getting some new jokes. So that was Woody Allen's first screenplay. He also had some Broadway success with a play called Don't Drink the Water, and which eventually was made into a movie, I think, with Jackie Gleason, memory serves. And he also wrote a play for Broadway that eventually became one of his early movies, Play It Again, Sam. So, and then his first movie as a director is not really his own movie at all. He took a Japanese spy movie and dubbed it in English, and so created a comedy out of something that wasn't originally meant to be a comedy. It's called What's Up, Tiger Lily, and not screened very often these days, but has anyone seen that one? No, I'm seeing no nods there. Well, it's worth it if you can catch it somewhere. I don't really know. It's about spies and it's sort of a Japanese James Bond movie, which he dubs into English. And gives a preposterous plot that has something to do with the world's best egg salad recipe, so that everybody is trying to get a hold of. The first movie he actually directed is also very funny, called Take the Money and Run, right? Which is a quasi-documentary long before anybody was doing those quasi-documentary, mockumentary kind of films. He kind of creates the genre, right? And then, of course, his breakthrough is Annie Hall in 1977, and I won't go into all the many other movies we talked about. So that's a lot of background to this movie. It was well received, as with all of, some of his movies became big hits and made a lot of money, like Annie Hall, but his movies rarely lose money. So they, a couple of the serious movies that he made, a couple of serious movies didn't do so well. Movies like August and forgetting another one, but his comedies have always made money, and so here we have this story that filmed in black and white, terrific cinematographer Gordon Willis, who worked with, in addition to Woody Allen, who he worked with on several movies, especially the black and white ones, but the color movies as well. But he was the cinematographer for Manhattan and a number of other Woody Allen productions, but also worked with Martin Scorsese, a lot of great directors over the years. A really terrific cinematographer, and you can see it here. So anyway, so we have these the Greek chorus sitting around in the deli, telling the story about Danny Rose, right, and all of his acts and how he was devoted to them. And so it becomes then a very affectionate portrait, in a way, of a guy who is, on the lower rungs of show business in New York, representing people like a one-legged tap dancer, if you remember, a blind xylophone player, a one-armed juggler, right? All these, the guy who has penguins who are dressed like Orthodox Jews, right? A series of small ridiculous acts, right? We get a glimpse of the woman who plays the glasses, right? Acts that, in a sense, you could see on the Ed Sullivan Show or on a vaudeville stage, I suppose, but pretty peculiar, right? uh, you know, and so how he would work his tail off devotedly, right, for these acts. We have the scene of him talking to this guy about how he believes he is going to be one of the great balloon folding acts of all time, right? It's, you know, you'll be playing universities, you'll be on Broadway. Just remember my 3 S's, right? Star, smile, strong. And, you know, that's it. So, so his brief sojourn as a stand-up comedian, right? All of these things. A clever little scene about his hypnotist who puts someone to sleep and can't wake her up. Right? Tessie won't wake up, right? So, so he offers to take the husband out to dinner. You know, any restaurant, your choice, I think he says. Right? So, and then they get to the main body of the story. His relationship with this Italian singer, Lou Canova, who had a few minutes on the charts, I think, you know, and 25 years later, Danny is still his manager and has faith in him and is going to try and break him big, right? And then, of course, the complications that when he does get a showcase to try out in front of Milton Berle, to be on Milton Berle's show, to be an opening act for him, you know, that's when all of the troubles ensue as Lou prevails on Danny to be a beard, right, for his girlfriend, who turns out to have some past connections to the mafia, particularly the New Jersey mob, and what happens after that. So you've all seen it, so I didn't need to go through it moment by moment, but you know, there's some lovely things. Joe Franklin, I don't know if anybody here remembers the Joe Franklin show, which was largely a New York show, but Joe Franklin appears as himself with Lou Canova on set, showing that Joe Franklin actually did have a sense of humor about himself, which was not always clear from watching his show, but actually knew what he was. And he says to, I think it's Lou Canova says to Joe Franklin, "You're New York, what can I tell you?" And that was kind of right about Joe Franklin for a while. So so I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Are there things that you liked about it? Questions, thoughts?
So I look up the people so that I can be ready to go. And I couldn't find it on IMDb, the names of the women. I mean, Mia Farrow, we know, but like Lou Canova's wife. So this is about men.
Yeah, well, it definitely is. So I think on IMDb you'll find her name, but she doesn't have much in the way of screen credits. I mean, which is interesting. There seem to be more amateurs in this, right? Like as you know, as Woody Allen's reputation as a director grew, even the tiniest parts seem to have famous people in them. You know, sometimes before they were famous, like who is in Annie Hall? I mean, Christopher Walken's appearance in Annie Hall, right around the time he really has his breakout performance in The Deer Hunter. You know, so but he makes an unforgettable scene in Annie Hall as Annie Hall's brother, right?
Yeah.
Dwayne, if I remember the character correctly. You know, and Meryl Streep has a couple of roles. Sigourney Weaver is in the last scene in Woody Allen in Annie Hall, playing Woody. She has no lines. She's just Woody Allen's date. When he runs into Annie Hall with her date on the street. He's with a very tall, statuesque woman. It's Sigourney Weaver, right? But later on, you know, every role is played by somebody famous, even small parts. You know, I mean, everybody wanted to work with him up to a point. You know, so to get a part where even if you just had a couple of lines in a Woody Allen movie, But this movie has a lot of people who don't have many credits to their name, and that includes her. I mean, so
Yeah, she has no picture. Linda and then Sandy.
What I wanted to do is thank the rabbi that what I noticed in this movie was the same thing that we saw in Bye Bye Braverman, was that they were running. They were just always on a mission to get the Milton Berle show. So that's what I wanted to thank you for. That was something that I noticed right away in this movie. And also, as a side note, the last time I was in New York was right before COVID, which would have been in 18. The Carnegie Deli was closed at that time. They were having some health issues. They were saying the sewer backed up or something. So it was closed at that time too.
Yeah, so it reopened for a time after that. They had some, I thought they had a fire of some kind, of maybe a grease fire or something, but I don't remember all the details. But yeah, then it opened and closed again. But yeah, no one ever. There's not a lot of sitting still in this movie, right? It's you know, you're constantly somewhere with these people, you know, and it does. Unusual for some Woody Allen movies, it crosses the border into New Jersey for a little while, right? You know, and they're wandering around in the meadowlands. You know, purported to be a. She says that, oh, I recognize this place. You know, my husband used to bury people out here. I think, you know, says something like that, and that's reported. You know, everything from people say, what's his name, the labor leader Jimmy Hoffa. Is, you know, under the stadium that was built in the Meadowlands, right? So outside of New York City. So yeah, it's a very it has sort of the spirit of New York to it, right? I mean, the city that never sleeps, right? There's something always going on.
And then there's also the same type of scene where they're driving along the river. Same thing as in Bye Bye Braverman, where they were filming it from high up, and they're showing Woody Allen driving.
Yeah,
and he's going somewhere. They were always driving somewhere. I don't know if that's the Hudson River that they were driving on.
If he was headed to New Jersey, that's the Hudson, right? There's Manhattan is an island, so there's rivers on both sides, right? So
they were driving in that too, which we think of tying in all these movies together.
Right. So we definitely see the Hudson at one point, because there's a shot where they cross the George Washington Bridge, which goes across the Hudson. So on their way to that party in New Jersey, right? Following her in New Jersey. So yeah, I see some other hands.
Sandy and then Ed or Judy. Sandy, go ahead.
And Michael's got a hand up too.
Okay.
Couple of comments. I was laughing out loud. I was alone in a room and just laughing out loud. So that's always a good sign that it's a great comedy.
Yeah.
But, you know, there were parts that were sort of unflattering to us as Jews, and I was a little embarrassed. And then they showed the Italians, and they did the same thing.
Yeah.
They had really some terrible looks at the Italian families. So that was interesting. But I did have a question. What is the word beard? How did that come about? What does that mean?
Yeah, I know it from a somewhat different context. I mean, in you know, the LGBTQ world, you know, like Cole Porter, who was gay, was also married to a woman, right? She was his beard.
Oh,
she made it look as if he wasn't gay to people who were concerned. Now, it's not that he didn't care about her, and he, you know, in Cole Porter's case, there's a whole movie about that as well. But so someone who hides what someone else is, right, is their beard, you know, like so that's
person who carries out a transaction, typically a bet, for someone else in order to conceal the other's identity.
Months ago, we watched the movie The Front, and Woody Allen plays that character who writes screenplays for other people. He's their front, but another word for what he does there is he's their beard, right? So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ed and Judy, and then Michael. Oh, wait a minute, they don't.
As to the previous comment, notice that great overhead shot of the car going, and we talked about it last week, where you suggested that it was probably shot out of a tall building, because for sure drones weren't available at that time. The scene that I actually, Judy corrected me. There's the scene where they're all tied up in ropes, and they're going to be chopped up, and he says I thought he said we've got to wiggle out of it, but Judy said no, you got to wriggle. It's wriggling out of it. I thought that was clever and amusing.
Yes. Yeah. So something about there are two of us, but pretty soon there'll be four of us.
Yeah.
Right? if they don't wriggle out of it, right? And of course, that whole scene, I mean, that's a great comic set piece, is wriggling out of the ropes and ending up in the warehouse where the Macy's balloons are kept.
That's right.
You get the gunshots into the helium tanks. And so the most menacing language, in the movie comes out.
And of course, here we are a week before the Macy's parade right now for Thanksgiving. So it was sort of an apropos time to see it.
Yeah, good timing for it, right? So, and in those scenes, I mean, it's very much like the old black and white film noir, adventure movies, hiding out in the warehouse and the gunshots and the way the movie is shot by Gordon Willis here. I mean, it harkens back to things like the Maltese Falcon, and the direction of somebody like John Huston in the film noir kind of style. But of course, then played against those Mickey Mouse voices because of the helium gas.
That's right.
It's so absurd and funny, so very clever. So, and of course,
Michael,
running into people filming a commercial, so that they can escape. Right?
A couple of observations. So going back to Braverman, I looked at a review, and I think it may have been Ebert, that those shots from on high were actually done from helicopters, according to that review.
Right.
But going to this film, you ask yourself, what would a Woody Allen movie be without the music? And other than Midnight in Paris, I can't think of any movie of his that I've seen where the music is more instrumental in conveying the essence of the film. And the reference to the black and white movies, I think, is interesting, because it almost was like a silent movie with the piano in the background, just sort of giving you the mood for the entire film. I thought it was just such an important part of this film in particular, with the same theme over and over again, this sort of burlesque type film.
Yeah.
The other observation I had is, like Braverman, this also, when it would pan New York, was not the beautiful New York. This was just sort of the neighborhood New York. There was nothing especially attractive about it, by and large, and it shared that in common. And in particular, for one of his films where, these are love affairs with the beauty of New York, this one wasn't. This was really gritty. And I think it came through in the way it was filmed.
Yeah, certainly a little bit more than, if you compare it to Manhattan, which has a whole montage with, I think, Rhapsody in Blue in the background of all the beautiful architecture of New York City, right? I mean, we don't have much of that in this movie. Still a little more, I think, than Bye Bye Braverman. We do get a nice shot of the George Washington Bridge, but it's mostly there to convey we're leaving New York and going to Jersey, right?
Right.
I did mention when Ed asked about that last week that it was possible that those were helicopter shots. I mean, that's how it would have been done in those days rather than drones. I was just curious about whether, helicopters were expensive in 1968. So, and I don't know what kind of budget Bye Bye Braverman had. But I'll presume if Roger Ebert says they're from a helicopter, he probably asked somebody and found out they were from a helicopter, you know. So, but that would have been the way to do that. And of course, you know, a lot of movies use what's called stock footage. Now in Bye Bye Braverman, we're pretty sure that it's not stock footage because it's got the little red Volkswagen in it all the time, right? But you know, you know, I have a friend who's a photographer and makes his money because people use his stock shots of things, you know, the bridges of New York and whatever, and advertising campaigns and all kinds of commercial work. So, Woody Allen certainly had the budget to do that shot however he wanted to do it, and probably used a helicopter for sure. And it looks seamless. So this is the movie he made, by the way, right after the movie Zelig, I think was his movie before this one. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that one, but that's another mockumentary, as they're called. And that one actually does use a lot of stock footage, but with special effects, they insert Woody Allen into all of them. Right. So a very clever piece of work as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, that something about it's not the big fancy New York. It depends a little on how you feel about the Carnegie Deli, you know, if you consider that really to be a landmark or just a neighborhood street. But yeah, some shots from Zelig. So
Yeah, I think so.
were there some other hands and thoughts? Did I miss something there? Yeah, Barb? You have to unmute, yeah.
A lot of interesting references that Woody Allen made to, you know, our culture, our beliefs, some of our, you know, he made reference somehow to kashrut when he said that he's always eaten all the right foods.
Right. Yeah.
He felt so guilty about giving up this other ventriloquist friend that he wanted to make amends and be forgiven. So he went to his hospital bed to ask forgiveness.
Yeah.
And little things that, and I should have written them down as I was watching.
Yeah.
But
Well, there's one that I like where they're talking about believing in God, right? Or guilt, right? I mean,
exactly,
how important it is that, you know, her philosophy of life is just do it and do it before they do it to you.
Yeah.
And his philosophy of life has to do with guilt. And he said, if there wasn't guilt, you know, and you know, if we didn't believe that God was watching, you know, then what? Right? And so do you believe in God? And he says, no, but I feel guilty about it.
Exactly.
Right? You know?
And then he proves his, you know, that he wants to be forgiven because of, you know, having this guy being beaten up on, you know, giving his name up, you know, thinking that he's on a cruise and that he would be safe, and it turned out he wasn't.
Right. You know.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of little things too. I mean, just like when they're walking through the Meadowlands, he parts some reeds, you know, and never seen. Well, and
I feel like
Moses, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and stuff like that. And there's, I mean, some of them, they go by so fast. I mean, you know, just trying to get him on the boat, and he calls himself a landlocked Hebrew. That one's really quick. It goes by really fast. Some of this stuff. And there's a few others like that. So, and at least a couple of times in the movie, this saying comes up with some Yiddish or some Hebrew. He says, "Emes, my hand to God," right? Which
lifts his left hand, by the way.
Okay.
That was interesting.
I don't know. Does that mean something?
Well, usually it's your hand to God is usually your right hand.
Oh, okay.
But I wonder if he's left-handed.
Yeah. And in case anyone doesn't know, emes, you know, in modern Hebrew would be emet, means truth. but it's one of those words that's both Hebrew and Yiddish, right? And as I said, I can't really think of many times where, a Woody Allen character uses a Yiddish term, there may be some here and there where he uses some of those very common words like shtick or things like that, but not that many, So I see Neil's got a hand up.
Yeah, you alluded to this earlier, but to generalize, it seems that Eastern Jews have no compunction about playing into Jewish stereotypes and using it for humor. But us Midwestern Jews, we try to be as waspy as we can.
Yeah.
Care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm, as I'm saying, when I lived in New York, even the delivery guys spoke enough Yiddish to talk to the storekeepers, right? And there's not many other places in America where it feels like that. And perhaps because of that, it feels like a pretty secure place to be Jewish. Despite the fact that there's plenty of anti-Semitic acts that happen in New York, but every politician has to go and court the Jewish community in New York. It's not like that in Kansas. There are Jews in Kansas. There are, decent sized community in places like Topeka, but I don't know that they feel that kind of security that they can say anything about themselves and not be, not be causing a shanda, right? Not be giving Jews a bad name in a place where people already think Jews may have one, right?
Can I expand that to say the Italians too? That
Yeah.
This fed into every Italian stereotype for the sake of humor that we can imagine. And I believe that his then girlfriend and later wife had just finished an affair with Frank Sinatra before she made this movie, right?
I don't know, right before. I mean, I'm not sure. There's some debate about when that started and ended anyway. I mean, right there, who is the father of their child together has been of some debate and conjecture in the newspaper. And I also, by the way, Woody Allen and Mia Farrow were never actually married, I don't think. They actually didn't even live in the same apartment in New York. They kept their own places the entire length of their relationship. So he's actually been married to Sunyi Previn, who was one of Mia Farrow's adopted children for longer than he was ever married to anybody. It's a kind of bizarre in its way, but interesting fact, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so I was actually just in New York 2 weekends ago now and went to a comedy club, and the first comedian who came out was an Italian American comedian, and talked all about this stuff that, again, probably wouldn't be talked about in some other parts of the country. It was a pretty old-fashioned set, but he was pretty funny, and he talked about how there's never going to be an Italian president. The closest we'll ever get, he said, is Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump was our Italian president. He said, I mean, what other president is like this? He's got his advisors, and then one day the advisor's just gone. What happened to that guy? And we don't talk about him, right? And he can't imagine any other president having an advisor whose name was the Mooch, right? And it's so which he made a pretty solid case in a way, right?
We have one more question or comment from Linda, and then we need to wrap up.
Oh my gosh, went fast.
My antidote is that years ago, I had a secretary, Amy, who was not Jewish, and she married an Italian guy from New York named Vinny, and they were at my house, and Vinny was from New York, and Amy said to me, Vinny said that we have to get that thing that you have on the door when we get married.
Yeah.
I said, are you talking about a mezuzah?
Yeah.
And Vinny said, yes, all homes have that and we need it. And I said, no, Vinny, those are just, and then I told him the reason for it.
Yeah.
But New York at that time, you know, because they would have been in their maybe 50s now, they thought that everybody had to have that on their door. And he was very, very Italian. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Okay.
That's great.
Uh,
That's lovely. So you've got 2 weeks to watch My Favorite Year, because next week I'm officiating at a wedding on Tuesday afternoon. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. And
My Favorite Year is on Amazon for $2.99, $1.99. Both these last movies, the reviews I like are Rotten Tomatoes, highly rated. I can't wait to watch My Favorite Year again, because I loved it when it came out the first time. And hopefully we'll see you all. If you have any questions, you know where to find me.
yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.